Let's get started with the recording. Okay, thank you very much for joining me. My name is Peter Buckingham. I'm the Managing Director of Spectrum Analysis. Today, we're going to run a two-part webinar. So I'm really looking forward to listening to Jack Stevens. Now, Jack is going to be the first presenter and I will follow Jack. So Jack is the CEO of Edstart, an Australian organisation dedicated to helping schools improve their fee payment experience with family care and technology. Having grown up with parents as school teachers, Jack is passionate about building solutions to help support access to education, as well as championing the role that independent schools play in developing our next generation. Under his leadership, Edstart has become a trusted partner for non-government schools and families, managing over $2 billion in school fees since it was established in 2017. And I'm just going to jump slightly sideways and say Jack and his company have produced a fantastic booklet, Schools Insights Report 2024, which I was privileged to see him present previously. So on that note, Jack, welcome aboard, and I'd like to hand over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Peter. Thanks for the introduction and also for having us join today. It is a delight to be able to share this out with more people. And what I'm talking about sharing there is this report that you just referenced, which is a kind of real-time snapshot, I think, of a sense of what's going on at the moment for both parents and schools. So I'll jump into that. I'll take only about 20 minutes or so and happy to take questions all the way through. Please feel free to drop those into the chat if you have them, or raise your hand here. So I'll share up a few slides here that we can walk through. There we are. All right, so Edstart's 2024 School Insights Report. Edstart itself, Peter just alluded a little to this, it's really about our belief in education as the most powerful investment that there is, and helping make that easier for schools and also for parents and students. Our education fee management company is really designed around helping to improve the payment experience for both schools and also for families. We work with over 700 schools around the country. The thing that I wanted to highlight here before I get into the results of our recent report is just a little bit on where the data actually comes from. I think that's important for any report. And where that data comes from is a whole selection of schools, a wide array of schools, every state and territory and right across the spectrum of independent and Catholic schooling. And also for parents, again, quite a wide sample across all varieties. And the reason that we can do that is because our product that we operate with schools, called Edstart Plus, manages payments from families right across the spectrum. That can include families that are happy to pay the whole amount of the school fees up front, a big lump sum, all the way through to those that require quite a lot of flexible care. And this Edstart Plus model sits in the middle of schools and families. And on the family side, every single family at the school will get a tailored payment arrangement to match their individual needs. And on the school side, the schools just issue invoices and they just all get paid. So simplifying the experience dramatically for both sides. That's why we've been able to draw quite a wide variety of insights for this 2024 report. The report is designed really to inform schools and inform school decision makers at this time of year. This time of year, for many schools, going into the budgeting cycle, although some schools have already done that, but really trying to give a real-time snapshot, a look behind the door of parents and a look at what other schools are thinking and doing as well. 3 topics that are covered in the report: education and wellbeing being the first. Also taking a look at the cost side of the equation, so managing costs and also staffing arrangements with schools. And then finally, school fees. That's the 3 topics that are covered. here reference that report that we've got. It's a 28-page report. We're just pulling out a few highlights here to share with you quickly today. So first section, education and wellbeing. Really the core business of any school is these two areas. And the first question that we asked for the purposes of this report was, I think, a pretty interesting one, which is this question here. We asked this question of, if your school had an extra $5 million to spend, what would be the top 3 areas to spend it on? We asked this question to schools, and we also asked this question to parents. If your school had a bonus $5 million, what would you like to see them spend it on? So, taking a look at the results here, if I just bring up the first section here. So we have looked at ordering these responses based on the parents' preferences, and you can see that there on the right-hand side of your screen. So parents, their responses, if we run from the top there, very high priority on teaching support, additional teaching support for learning needs, followed by more teachers and smaller class sizes, followed by wellbeing support specialists. So really parents gravitating right towards the idea of additional teaching and learning support, and indeed smaller classes, and therefore a more tailored experience. If we contrast that to schools, which is on the left-hand side, quite a significant difference, and a huge swing for schools towards the type of spending that you'd typically characterize as those facilities-related spending. So at the bottom, you can see some of the largest ones: new and refurbished classroom facilities, almost all schools nominating that. More student facilities like canteens, common rooms, and also performing arts spaces, those ones there on the left-hand side, really strong for school preferences. So quite a dramatic difference in preference set between the two groups if we look at the parents versus the schools. So the school side of things there, we're looking at those sort of 4, particularly if you look at classroom facilities, 75%, versus really only 17% of parents actually nominating that as a top priority. And for parents here, if we zoom in on those areas, that's those top 4. So basically the top 3, all about effectively additional staff, additional staff to support individual learning needs one way or another. And also the 4th one there, if you wouldn't mind while you're at it, providing some extra scholarship or some bursary as well, is clearly a reflection of parents feeling some financial pressure at the moment, which is understandable. The next section that we dived into was student wellbeing, and student wellbeing was a really significant topic in last year's report. So significant, in fact, that we found last year 54% of parents nominated this as their primary reason for choosing a school. 69% nominated this as their primary reason for leaving a school, and 23% said they wanted more support from their school on this topic. So clearly, wellbeing is continuing to escalate as a top priority for parents. In this year's report, 2024, we looked just to dive one level deeper into that to provide more insight to schools. And we did that by trying to uncover, what do people actually mean when they say student wellbeing? Because it's a pretty broad word that gets thrown around a lot, and we're trying to unpack, when parents say, this is my number one reason for choosing or leaving a school, what do you actually mean? What does wellbeing mean to you? And so we asked that question to both schools and parents. We asked schools, where are you placing the most emphasis, the most focus on wellbeing? And to parents, what more can schools provide in the area of wellbeing? So trying to bring out, to help schools decide on spending priorities, what more would parents like to see? So the responses here, firstly, from parents, counselling and support services, education and resources on mental health, anti-bullying coming in at number 3, and interestingly, physical health coming in at number 4. Now, physical health I found quite surprising. You talk about well-being, people tend to think about mental health, but physical health right up there in terms of priorities for parents as well. Now, contrast to school responses. So broad agreement on the first 2. Clearly, schools having a strong interest in well-being resources for teachers, which makes a lot of sense. But some areas of difference as well. So these highlighted areas there, anti-bullying, take a look at school responses in this area. So 5 strategies most commonly coming through from schools when we ask them this question. Firstly, in the area of reducing outlay, 54% of all schools have said they are actively renegotiating with suppliers. 47% are postponing or cancelling capital projects. And 31%.
Jack, we had a stoppage, but hopefully we've all come back again. So okay. I think we lost about a minute, but just for your information. Okay, no keep going. So there we go.
Yeah, all good. Thanks, Peter. 31% looking at increasing class sizes. Of course, that's the key lever for being able to manage the cost base of the school. The other area, and the 4th most common strategy, was actually more about increasing revenue in the form of renting out school facilities. So thinking about a school's balance sheet, there's obviously the biggest asset base is typically the property. How could we generate more yield out of that asset? Maybe for some schools, renting out school facilities more so is a potential strategy. And finally, around increasing efficiency. So this is an area where schools have looked increasingly at outsourcing of non-core functions, non-educational functions in particular. Now, this very wide-ranging all the way from bus services, gardening, cleaning, you name it. There's so many areas that schools need to operate, so many different sub-services that are within there. An interesting area to explore, and trying to look at where can schools both get a better financial outcome, but at the same time also provide a better customer experience, whether that's to parents or students or indeed staff. So quite interesting to see how high I think these numbers are. Probably not overly surprising, particularly in those top 2 on the left-hand side of the screen, but really interesting the other ways that schools are looking at navigating the overall budgetary challenge. A question that often comes up for me is around how Edstart supports and helps in this area. Just to give you a very, very quick snapshot, we do this analysis with every school that we work with, sort of a before and after using Edstart. And one of the key areas where we really drive substantial value and substantial efficiency is in the form of the overall revenue of the school, the overall cash receipts indeed. So this is an example school before using Edstart, after. Cash receipts annually have gone up by over 5 million. And we break down the reasons for that around fee increases, which is the obvious one, collection rate, which was significant here, some increase to enrolments, and also some benefit from the overall government funding rate, recurrent grants per student. Really where Edstart can have a significant impact for a typical school in this space is by improvement to the overall collection rate, in this case, over $1 million of benefit, but also helping to soften the blow of fee increases, which is a really important thing for schools coming through at the moment, and also helping to support and retain enrolments as well. So it's just a quick snapshot of how Edstart contributes there in the space of overall economic financial benefit for schools. Now, if we come to the other question that we asked schools, which is what factors, apart from the obvious one, which is staffing costs, but what other factors are you expecting will have a material impact on school fee changes for next year? And really interesting to see some obvious ones here in the form of utilities, maintenance costs, construction costs, all contributing quite significantly. A lot of schools still grappling with a reduction in government funding. Some schools, particularly the higher fee schools in Victoria, of course, nominating there the impact of payroll tax, which is obviously a significant one for some schools as well. And also just a quick snapshot on the staffing side of things. Question we asked is around attraction and retention of staff, which is probably one of the most significant issues for schools at the moment. When it comes to attracting staff, what we saw is pretty high numbers for these strategies at the top here. So wellbeing and benefits program, and also non-teaching staff to support teachers, quite significant. Salaries have gone up in most regions quite substantially. In some categories, that's an individual school choice. In others, it's to do with obviously an enterprise agreement. And there's a few areas here at the bottom that probably aren't used particularly well at all, but something for schools to consider, some of these at the bottom about whether that's an appropriate strategy to be thinking about. All right. One other question here on staffing about flexible and hybrid working. Just thought it'd be interesting to throw this snapshot in as well. 36% of all schools said yes, they're currently offering some form of flexible or hybrid working arrangements, but also another 14% actively under consideration at the moment. So to think about particularly non-teaching staff, where you're competing in a pool of talent that would be looking at working in non-school environments as well, where often flexible or hybrid working is more common. Clearly that's under consideration for a lot of schools as well, about whether there's a way of being able to offer that within the constraints of the school environment. Final topic, school fees, and always an interesting one at this time of year, coming into that budget cycle. What are other schools doing? What are parents expecting? And that's really the two areas that we've been able to cover here in this report. So first off, the big question we ask schools, how much are you expecting your fees to increase next year? But we also asked parents, given the current economic climate and its continued impact on costs for families and schools, what do you expect to be the change in school fees for next year? So we'll jump into the results of this one. On the left there, firstly, this is what schools are planning to do when it comes to next year's school fees. 47% will be increasing by a percentage that is more than 5. So a number that is above 5%, a further 22%, 4 to 5%, 20%, 3 to 4%. So it's pretty clear what the pattern will be for schools. Now, keeping in mind this is national data, so this is an average of all states. Now, to consider the parent expectations on the other side of the screen here. So parents, dramatically different view of the world, which is often the case. So 30% of all parents saying no fee change, in fact, maybe even a reduction, but only 10% nominating a number that is more than 5%. So clearly a pretty significant expectation gap here between parents and schools. Of course, there's some hopefulness, some optimism, probably in that parent response, but even factoring that in, what we've got here is a parent base where only 10% of those are expecting the most likely outcome, which is that their school increases by more than 5%. So this is a challenge. It's a challenge for schools to grapple with this expectations gap. The other thing that we looked at is how those expectations have changed year on year. So if we look 12 months ago, that's the blue bars here, and this is school responses. What were school what were schools expecting to increase by this time last year? And now in the most recent survey, what are schools expecting to increase? So there's actually a significant jump in schools being more confident of going higher with fee increases for the upcoming year as opposed to the previous one. And for families, moving the other way, in fact. So the expectations gap has actually widened. We've had this year even more families, so 30% compared to 19% 12 months prior, expecting a increase of 0 or in fact a fee reduction. So quite interesting to see the trend there year on year as they've actually moved apart. Final question on this topic that I really wanted to highlight, because I think it's one of the most interesting ones. We asked parents basically the question of why? Why do you think school fees are increasing? So the words we use there, what reasons do you think are behind potential fee increases? And this is the top responses. So 36% nominating general inflation and economic factors, only 10% nominating teacher wages, which we all know is the main driver of the need for those fee increases. But interestingly, there's another category here that surprised me the most, the largest category, in fact, this one here. Very, very significant percentage of parents saying we just actually don't know. We're not sure why fees would go up. We're not sure what the reasons are behind potential fee increases. So this was a significant surprise for me. In fact, probably these two areas. So there's clearly a lack of understanding going on within the parent base. Not all parents, of course, but a significant chunk that are not connecting fee increases with teacher wages, despite the fact that we saw at the early part of this presentation, that's really what the parent preference is: more teachers, more learning support, et cetera, and even more interestingly, a huge percentage saying we're actually not sure. We actually don't know why school fees would go up. So I found that to be super interesting. So if we just try to wrap this up to conclude, I think overall the challenge for schools here is ongoing. There's a widening fee expectations gap, and it seems that there's a lack of understanding about why fees increase at all. And opportunities for schools here, I think, are in two areas. So firstly, around the communication. Real opportunity, I think, for schools to rethink the way that fee increase communication is done. It's a very traditional approach. Every school does it. It's a letter that's sent out around this time of year or sometimes later in the year, almost apologetically saying that fees are going up. I think there's a real opportunity to change that, change the thinking around that quite dramatically. And also payment flexibility is obviously an area that there's going to be more and more need for in the context of this fee expectation gap. So making it easier for people to pay is the simplest way to soften the blow of those unexpected fee increases. So that's really the bulk of the topics that I want to cover. There's a lot more obviously in the report, but if I just skip through to this final section here, one of the things I did want to let you know is that if there's any information there at all that you would like to know more about, feel free to just email that email address there, schools@edstart.com.au. We'll be able to get right back to you if it's a specific question, some further information that you'd like to look at, or indeed if you'd just like a copy of the full report, which might be interesting for yourself, your colleagues, board at the school, et cetera, et cetera. You can also scan that QR code there if you've got your phone handy and request that from us. So really, really happy to hear feedback, comments, or requests for any other data points that might be of use in this season of planning for 2025. But otherwise, I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Jack. Thank you for a very good report. Okay. Okay, I want to have a chat today about what we're now doing. And many schools would know we've worked directly with the school mainly about their pupils and future students. We're also using a lot of our knowledge now to come into childcare and preschools. Now, most of the schools we work with actually have a whole section of a preschool. Maybe it's aiming at the 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds. What we're finding is the same logic sort of goes, that it's facts and data, and we're all about trying to help people with that. So let me just share a presentation we've prepared. And how I want to start off by is saying that, sorry, I'll just get this thing moving properly. So what we want to do is be able to give schools and childcare centres and all that preschool market an ability to actually be more logical in how they make their decisions. Now, we're all hearing a lot of words like, oh, this area is a desert. Other people get words, oh, I can't get my child booked in. All those sort of type of approaches you hear. But what we're all about is facts and data. And how can we actually measure that and see it and put a proper logic around if we are going to make decisions on putting in a preschool, or we're going to go and open more childcare if we're a group of childcare providers. So we're all about identify areas for new locations. What sort of analysis tools and reports can we get to support an investment? Understanding the potential opportunities. Obviously, if you are a preschool or you are a childcare, you'll be doing some marketing. If you're already full, well, that's great news. And what we want to show is we can have some interactive, secure display in form of our mapping, and we can visualize the census data and other data that really gives us an ability to know what's coming. Okay, so there's two sides we always look at, which is supply and demand. So if we start off with the supply side of childcare and preschool, really, we can start off by saying, how many approved places are there in any area? Now, this little legend, I guess, looks a bit complex, but you'll get it fairly quickly, because basically it shows in our mapping that everywhere there is a white square, it's got to be one of a couple of different types. One, if it's a green on top, it's purely a long daycare. If it's blue on the right-hand side, dark blue, it's a kindergarten or a preschool, but it's standalone. If it's light blue on the left-hand side, then it is part of a school or a kindergarten. It's part of a school. And the bottom three represent the sort of before school, after school, or vacation. So in Australia, there's over 16,800, I think it is, preschools in Australia. Oh, there we go, 17,696. That's of June 2024. And for every one of these, we can get information, or there is information provided by ACECQA. Don't ask me to explain exactly what ACECQA stands for. Approved Education Care Services. So we can see every one of these childcares across Australia and then actually have data on it about what it is, how big it is, what type of childcare it is. So, for example, we just brought one up here, CGS Pre-Prep Centre. It's Camberwell Grammar School, 55 Mont Albert Road. It's got a phone number for Camberwell Grammar or the preschool. It has 27 approved places, and it's meeting the national quality standard. So it is showing us part of a school, and even though it might do a bit of other things, it's not really pushing in that place. Now, why I guess I'm finding this very interesting with preschools is, what is the most perfect student, if that happens, if that exists, you can have? There's probably some child that comes to the preschool for 1 or 2 years and then goes straight into prep and goes for another 13 years at your school. Very little hassle if that's the case. So what we're believing is, I was speaking with a girls' school the other day, and they were saying that half of the children that go to their preschool then go into their prep year. So pretty good way of filling your prep year without having to go and raid every kindergarten and long daycare facility around your area. But it's a very good starting point. Now, when we think about the preschool, the supply side, we can add up all of the approved places in an area and come up with how many are there. I guess the demand side is how many children live in the area and what is the attraction to them to want to go to preschool, or are they just purely going to go to childcare? But a lot of childcare is now incorporated preschool in their later years. So I thought I'd start off with a couple of little areas, and this is all available Australia-wide. And we've had it all mapped, we've got it all working. So the first thing is, in this little section, what we're doing is we're taking a radius, because if we just took one specific area, it may be that all the preschools are sitting on the other side of the boundary road, and therefore it's not giving a true picture, but we can look at it that way. What we tend to do is, if we're in an inner area, which is certain parts of inner Melbourne and probably the very in Sydney, all that area, call it the eastern suburbs, where you get densities of like 100,000 people per square kilometre. We're starting off in those sort of areas at a 3 kilometre radius. If we're in a middle area, which is middle metropolitan, typically areas with the 500-600 square metre block, normal suburbia, we normally go to a 5 kilometre radius. And if we're in outer areas, which tend to have a lot more green wedges and areas designated for non-residential, then we go to an 8 kilometre. So I'll just give you the example here is Mickleham-Yoroke. It's an outer area. We're just measuring here at an 8 kilometre radius. We can measure and we can see from the census how many children there were by age group. We can actually see how many long daycare approved places there are, 2,785. If we look at that ratio of our 12,006 students divided by our supply of how many places, we get 4.31. Now, across Greater Melbourne, that average is 2.43. So there's 2.43 places in childcare of some facility, be it kindergarten, part of a school, or a pure long daycare centre. There's 2.43 children per placement. Now, this means this area has an underage or overage of 1.88, and it's very high demand. So in other words, there's not enough placement for the number of kids in the area. We've just run a similar one here for Clifton Hill, Alphington in Melbourne. Now, again, middle area, we're only running at 5 kilometres. We can vary this. We can bring it into 3. We can do what we want. But the point of that is we've got 12,835 children. We've got 7,229 daycare places. Therefore, that ratio is at about 1.83. Just having trouble with my thing here. So what we're seeing is we have low, it's under. So we actually have low demand. So the number of place of opportunities is reasonably strong compared to how many kids are in the area. So we can run this, and obviously if we go out into some of these areas they're calling the childcare desert, or going into the country, we can really see what that looks like. Maybe country, we have to run it at 25 kilometres, but obviously in a Bendigo, Ballarat, Townsville, these sort of things would be doing similar to metropolitan. Okay. Now, the second part of all this is, what is the future going to look like? And what we have here is the data. So every 5 years, if you think of a census cycle, that the data comes out. It came out in 2019 last time, October 2019, and it gave us population projections at SA2 area, standard area 2, similar to postcodes, out to 2032. So in this area of Burwood East, what we've done is we've done this Australia-wide. We've taken the 0 to 4 age as our preschool, 5 to 11 as our primary school, 12 to 18 as secondary, and we've just joined the second ones because most of our work historically has been K to 12 schools. So we can see this area in Burwood in Melbourne, East Burwood, was expected to grow from 2022 of 563 0 to 4-year-olds to 637, or an increase of about 13%. At the same time, it was about 13% in the primary kids, about 17% in secondary, overall about a 15.6% of school children. But because we're talking preschool, we're probably most interested in that. So there is organic growth coming out of that area. Now, you can go to some areas like Toorak, and a lot of these areas that are absolutely were built in the 80s or 90s. Mum and dad are still there. Toorak, problem is grandpa and grandpa are still living in the house and it's not turning over. You combine that with smaller family groups now than there were probably 20 years ago. And some of these areas in this darker brown, they're actually going backwards. Some of the areas in the middle brown, they tend to be the ones that are probably going because they were built about 25, 30, 40 years ago. And then you can see your dark green and light green and dark green. Dark green being the highest one. Now, to give you an example of that, I've just brought up Tarneet. Now, Tarneet is very similar. If you're in Sydney, you'd know Marsden Park or Cobbitty. Tarneet and Wyndham Vale and Truganina are the Werribee corridor. To give you an idea, in Tarneet, it's going to grow from 5,930 preschoolers through to 7,691, or nearly 30% increase in a 10-year period. Their school children are already, the numbers are there because this area was populated 5, 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. It's now up to about a 60.4% increase in the 12 to 18-year-olds. So overall, as a school, this area is going to grow by 50% of school students in this 10-year period. So what we've got is a very good picture now of what is the growth going to be in any specific area. So we can also look at this data in terms of, I've now moved out to an SA3. So standard areas 2, there are around 2,600 across Australia. In standard area 3, they're more like 400 across Australia. So again, what I'm trying to do is not just get down to a standard area 2 where there may be really fluctuations near the border. I'm taking a bigger area. So to give you an idea of the sort of data that's available, this is Burundara, or Camberwell, as you would probably know it if you didn't live in Melbourne. So the data is set up Australia-wide to look at what is the population, what is the average household income as a sign of the socio-demographic, what is the actual number of, or the percentage of 0 to 5-year-olds, 6 to 12, we've done our thing again of preschool, primary school, secondary school. And then what is the population projection to get an idea of comparing apples to apples? Well, this area is expected to grow about 9.7% over that 10-year period. Now, I did say that this data came out in October 2019, and we're expecting the new data to come out in October this year, and that should take us out to 2037. But that is always produced by the ABS on behalf of the Department of Health, and they want to know where it is as to where to put hospitals and medical surgeries. So what we also find for any area in Australia is in the census you're asked, do you have children? Are they boy or girl? Do they go to preschool, primary school or secondary school? And then do they go to government, Catholic or independent school? So we can look at any area and say, in this area alone, I'm adding these two together, there were 3,000 children that their parents actually said they went to preschool. I'm not sure that was a great way of asking the question myself, because I think a lot of childcare is actually right down to grade 1-year-olds, and it probably didn't get interpreted that way. But again, we can compare apples to apples by being able to do this for any area. We can see how many kids are at primary, secondary. We can see what the totals are, what percentage are at government school, what percentage are at Catholic school, and what percentage are at independent. The last thing we can tell is if we are in a bit of an ethnic area, maybe we do want to do some marketing in another language. Maybe we are in the western suburbs of Sydney. Well, we can actually see language spoken at home was a point in the census. So we can actually say this area has what percentage of families actually speak different languages. Now, we've also just thrown in on this other side the data that comes from Boroondara to say, well, what is those actual number of children? What is the comparison of how many's it changed or expected to change from 2022 to 2032? 8.7%. And how many daycare centres, how many placements there are in that area, and what that ratio looks like. So hopefully we can get a good picture for any area we want to of the data to help us make better decisions if we are going to be doing decisions on childcare. So just looking at a couple of other areas, here is Keilor. Again, you can see the big picture of Melbourne in supply and demand, and we're starting to see this area is in high demand. We can also produce many sorts of reports. We have a very good client in the childcare area called Cool Kids, and we do some reporting for them, which helps them also see for any area at a 2, 3, and 5 kilometre radius, what is the breakdown of the children by age group, and what is the socio-economics of the age group, population, and right through to what is this percentage, or we can work out what the numbers are that are relevant to supply and demand for the aged care. They're very kind to give us a bit of a referral, which I'll just leave around for anyone to have a look at, but we've been working them many years. And the other two things we have done is we have set up our mapping in a test run for anybody. We created an imaginary childcare centre at Gels Park or Glen Waverley area, and you only have to go onto the pick up off the ELC, pick up off the QR code, or this is on our website, and you can have a play around that area. It is geo-fenced to not go halfway across Melbourne, obviously, but you can see all the things I'm talking about in our example. We've also written a book, an e-book on childcare and early education, and we invite people to please take it, download it. You can read it off your phone if you so desire. So what I just want to conclude with is we're moving Spectrum into the childcare space as well as where we've been previously. And I'm happy to say that we should be able to really help schools if they wish to know where they're going. I've just got to find where I'm turning this off. Stop my share. So we're now working with schools. If they have a preschool, we'll obviously be able to give them information there. If they're thinking of opening a preschool, or maybe they need this type of information to help with that decision, or if we're in childcare with some of our clients, if they want to work on where they're going to open and do what we call strategic network planning, we've set that up for everybody to be able to use. And we can obviously do reports and things accordingly. So look, hopefully that gives everybody a bit of an idea on what we're doing. And as we're coming up to our end point, maybe I can hand over to you, Sue, and tell me if there's any questions for Jack or myself.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Jack. Yes, it's been a fantastic presentation. Thank you both. There's no questions in the chat, but I will invite people to unmute shortly if they'd like to ask a question. But meanwhile, I'd like to just kick off a question of my own for Jack, if I may. And that is, you mentioned that parents were really interested in physical activity, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on why that was a particular demand from parents. But also, when we get our tax return, we find out how our government dollar has been spent. What would you recommend for the communication for schools mentioning a fee increase in the communication methodology?
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, I think on that physical health one, to me, that's a theme that has really escalated during the lockdown period.
Right.
And indeed, post-pandemic, there was this sense that the physical, when you shut off the ability to have that physical and social related interaction, ideally in the form of physical activity, then that can have a pretty significant impact on a lot of other things as well. So to me, that's why that's quite, escalated in terms of parent preferences, thinking about, well, hang on, physical health here is just as important as some of the other aspects of supporting student wellbeing through mental health initiatives. And then the other one around fee increases is particularly interesting. When I talk there about the communication opportunity for schools, I reflect on even taking inspiration from other fields about how they present this overall message of, the cost is going to be higher. And to take an extreme example of that, you could even think about the amazing product of the Apple iPhone, and when Steve Jobs used to get up every year and talk about the new iPhone this year. Now, in the background, that had a cost increase associated of probably 20% or more, but he wasn't apologizing to everyone for having a 5% price increase. What he was doing is talking about all the amazing things that the phone does. And I just think there is a potential opportunity for schools to shift their thinking there, because schools are doing amazing things. And it's one of the reasons why independent schools have had such fantastic enrollment growth over now a long period of time, and it's been accelerated post-pandemic, is because they do things in an amazing way. They do provide that amazing tailored experience that parents are clearly looking for. And being able to present those positives, and by the way, the fees are only going up by 5%, that's a bargain. That kind of language, maybe that's an opportunity to rethink it. I realize that's difficult to do, and there's a lot of nuance and whatever, but I guess that's my 2 cents on the communication opportunity.
Absolutely. And your point about the teachers being paid what they're worth and being supported by admin staff. I mean, there's a lot of people out there in the real world who know how difficult the teachers have got it. So can fully concur with that. Jeremy has asked a question. Thank you, Jeremy. Does your report include data on rates charged by centres in an area? Probably that's a question for Peter, perhaps. The mapping.
No, at this stage, our data is all about data off ACECQA, data off census, data off ABS other sources. There was talk, we have been in some discussion with a company that actually tries to get updated planning data to sort of know where new childcare or anything is going to come from. We need to re-engage with them and see whether they've got it as good as they were sort of talking. And we did feel it might be better in some councils than others. So whether it was 100% reliable would be a problem. But no, we don't really have. There is. Sorry, I'll go back to just read me that question again, Sue, if you don't mind.
Well, I was just going to say, based on what you've already shown me on the online mapping, there is the number of people in the children versus the number of approved places. So I think that would be interesting data. And I did do some work for a childcare centre many years ago, and I was her mystery shopper, and I was the parent ringing up asking about what the fees were. So I mean, if you were interested, you could probably just do it manually. But the question was, does your report include data on rates charged by centres in an area?
No, look, at this stage, we haven't. The interesting one on schools is we do have a fairly good handle on fees for schools, because they have to supply to the ACECQA and education area how much they get from total for fees, charges and parents' contributions. But to my knowledge, I haven't seen anything from childcare along that line. And as much as I know there is a gentleman in Queensland that does some mapping things, I think they try and ring the childcares to try and do that mystery call, but the problem being 16,500 childcares. I'm not volunteering for that straight up front. We have done that with retirement villages in a past life with jobs we've done. Wow. So that is a bit of an issue.
Yeah, I can imagine. Are there anybody else who would like to just unmute or raise their hand in Zoom and ask a question? By the way, you're most welcome to reach out to both Peter and Jack after the webinar if there's a question you'd like to ask without being in front of everybody else and on the recording. So that's definitely an option. And I'm sure both of them would be happy to answer those questions without any obligation or commitment from the get-go. Just, you know, call them up and ask what else is available. Peter also does demonstrations of the online mapping with you personally on a Zoom call. So that can also be very helpful. So here's your last chance. Just unmute or hand raise or pop your video on and I'll call your name. Otherwise, it might be time to enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Well, look, I'm just going to thank you, Jack, very much for coming on board with our small webinar that we run. And I really enjoyed, as I said, I came to your presentation. And one of the funniest things I thought was when one of the guys who was a business manager said, oh, it's not really good. The parents want all this soft and fuzzy things about making their kids better. We just want to go and build more things. We love building schools, doing that. And he said, that's what we like to do. So it was definitely quite a difference. And he has built quite a big school. So, yeah, he did make a funny comment.
Yeah. Conversely to that, I was actually at a presentation and one of the reasons parents chose a school was because of the facilities. So it's not as if that's not a factor. It definitely does appeal to some parents as to why they would send their school, because they know that in a lot of government schools, a lot of those facilities are not available. So I can understand it. It is a bit of a carrot as well.
Yeah. And anybody who's going off to Educate Plus in Perth next week, I will be there. We have a stand and please come and say hello if you're I'll probably be a bit bored. You know, it's a weird thing doing that for a couple of days. But anyway, thank you very much for attending and hopefully we'll be doing a couple more of these fairly soon. Take care. Bye. Okay.